Before we get into the nitty-gritty of the video, there is something I need to get off my chest. I have a tendency to wear female wigs. A lot of you may have already had your opinion on what that's all about. On a serious note, I think it's time. It's 2023, guys. It's live and let live. I want to let you know where I am now, the reason I am doing this, and how I want you to look at me in the future. A lot of you have already guessed it, but I do self-identify now as a complete twat. Glad to get that off my chest. We all know where we are. Remember, live and let live. And the nitty-gritty is the Marshall Middleton. It's not the Marshall Middleton at all. It looks like the Marshall Middleton on steroids. It's the Marshall Middleton. It's the Marshall Middleton with a different speaker setup. It's got woofers on the front, obviously. Oh no, it hasn't. It hasn't got woofers on the front at all. It's got passive radiator front, passive radiator rear, along with the tweeter front and rear, and the woofers are on the side. Woofers are on the side, and this is all to do with the fact that we know already. These Marshall speakers, I laughingly call them Marshall speakers. They are Sound Industry speakers. Marshall name is licensed to them to use. Do they have any other input? Not that I'm aware of. Maybe they have some audio input, but I'm not aware of any. If you look at what's out there, the deal is all about licensing the name, so they make them look like Marshall amps. People seem to love that. They put the logo on there saying it's a Marshall speaker, but it's made in China, and it's designed by Sound Industries. It's all about them making their USP. We have spatial sound, so they're not calling it spatial. We've just had the Motion X600 spatial. They were all different. They used to call it Blumline processing. Some psychoacoustics to make it sound bigger than the speaker itself. On the speaker, the marketing they're going with is true stereophonic. By the way, they're all true stereophonic on the table here. What is stereophonic? Well, it's anything that tries to create a 3D image. I talk about stereo as simple left and right separation and you know, just a pair of those two left and right channels, but it can be any number of drivers. As long as it creates a 3D image, that's a stereophonic. Stereo is simply shortened form, the shortening of the word stereophonic, and it includes binaural. It's all about your ears perceiving things coming from places other than the speaker itself, simply because the processing that's going on, and they're saying a unique form of multi-directional stereo sound. But we've come to know Marshall as simply having some sort of reverb, some sort of phase things going on. And that, because it hits your ears, different bits of the sound hitting your ears with a different timing than you normally get from straight stereo. And your brain, working the way it does, builds that into an image, making it slightly bigger or coming from different places than it's actually coming from. But it's tending just to sound a bit echoey on the Marshall. Let's see how it is on the Marshall Middleton. Just know that's what they're saying, calling it true stereophonic. They talk about being rugged. It's IP67. The 6 means it's dust-proof. The 7 means it's 1 meter of water for 30 minutes. And you may look at it and think, well, it's got a silicone cover and that's nice and protected. But do you know, that's actually a thin cover that easily removed, and that's actually hard plastic under there and easily breakable, and I'm not sure that would take much of a drop. But the thing about that being easily removable is you take the cover off, there's 4 easily to remove screws there, your battery's under there. This is a very, very easy replacement of the battery if you ever needed to do that. They talk about it having 20 plus hours of portable playtime, but of course that's mixed use, although they're not even saying that it's mixed use. 20 hours of playtime. We don't know what volume it's biased to, and it really is one of those, again, pointless marketing. They might as well say 24 hours, nobody's going to argue. But some people really do believe that means you can play at any volume you want and get 20 plus hours, and they complain that you don't. Well, just know the size of the battery and the battery management that goes on. 20 hours, it's not going to be at maximum volume. That is for sure. Take you 4.5 hours to charge it from flat. It's got stack mode, so you can connect it to other Marshall Middleton speakers. And if you had 2 of them, you can connect them in stereo. Oh no, you can't. So they've got stack mode. You can connect as many, I think, Marshall Middletons as you want. But if you've got 2, you won't get stereo. There's nothing in there to say you can do stereo mode. And by the way, in my app where I went in to have a look at the stack mode, the stack mode and the EQ, we've got EQ on here. By the way, yes, we've got very hard to see controls because they're all in black. And if it's any sort of bad lighting, you're never going to see them. But we've got bass up, we've got treble up, treble down, it will show you where you are there, and the bass down, the bass up, volume up, volume. These, I don't like these rockers, but they seem to think they're great. So volume up, volume down, and to turn it on and off half the time, I'm just adjusting the volume by mistake. We've got a battery indicator button there and the Bluetooth indicator. But you can also mess with the EQ, the two tone controls in the EQ. But by the way, when I was looking, it disappeared on day 2, and since day 2, using the app, the EQ's gone. I don't know what that's about at all. You're wondering about how does it go? Well, we'll do the loudness test anyway. That's all you really need to know. They have all sorts of creative ways now of coming up with the watts figure on these speakers. It's become another one of those really meaningless stats, like 20 plus listening hours. Just know, we don't really know. They talk two different things. They talk about both it having 2 15-watt woofers and 2 10-watt tweeters. But is that rate, that's, I guess, just what they're rated at, and that up to 50 watts. But then they say got 2 20-watt class amps and 2 10-watt class D amplifiers, and that adds up to 60 watts and makes it a bit overpowered for the woofers. But take it, so 50 or 60 watts, but it really isn't here or there to tell you how loud it goes. Even in the real world, if all other things being equal, you'd need to know other specs anyway. It's got this weird lanyard, this strap, and the problem for me is the clue. When I went into the box, that this is not a straightforward lanyard, is that it's got its own instructions. When you have instructions just for the strap, you know that someone's got sacked at the design team. To take this on and off requires screwing. A lot of people will say, well, it's all right with me, I'm going to start screwing. But
naughty.
instead of one of those buttons that you can clip in and out, or you may argue then come out easy, but this is a nightmare. So I'm even struggling now to take that off. And what that involves, first of all, this is just a bit of flimsy plastic. To put that on, that goes under there. Imagine doing this out in the field, and it's early morning and you haven't even got the light. So that goes there. Then you take that and you put that over that tiny little protrusion, and then that one goes over that protrusion, and then you've got to line them all up, and then you've got to screw this little thing in. Imagine doing this, you're out there, you're under the influence of something, and it's getting dark. This would be a nightmare. And what would be the point? Because even if you go through all that, it's flippy floppy, it's bigger than the size of the speaker itself, it's already flopping over the woofer. They've carefully put the woofers on both sides, and then they have this lanyard that flops right over it. But then, how are you going to use it? So it's not a strap like you get with JBL Xtreme 3 on both sides, goes over the shoulder. This would have to go on your hand. It's up to you. If you want to walk through the shopping mall like that and not get any questioned at all, that's fine. You maybe hold it like that. I don't see the point. The other thing may be all right on a motorbike handle or on a branch or something like that. You're out in the field, you're going to wrap it over something. But that involves what I just said, taking it off, running it around, screwing it in, and then having to redo it again when you're finished playing with it. I just find that overly awkward, overly designed. It's got some sort of unique setup on the drivers. They talk about unique DSP. Let's have a look at the frequency response measurements. Measured front on, very big bass adjustment at low volumes, 40%. Look how big that bass is relative to the rest of the frequency response. And as you go up the volume scale, that drops right away. By the time you're at maximum volume, there's no bass at all. I mean, it's miles rolled off. Your bass light at 80%, and you're kind of okay at 60%, but we've got this big high-end peak around the 9 kilohertz mark. Measured from the rear, it is different to front on. It's different in the highs. The highs are quite different. Measured on the side, don't forget the woofers are on the side of the speaker. Obviously, the high end is a complete mess. We're just facing the woofer at this point, and left and right sides are basically the same. So we can average all 4 sides out. This is what we get. It's still very, very wavy. Quite honestly, there's gaps everywhere. And the high end dominated by that 9 kilohertz peak, and then quite a rapid roll-off. Overlaying the front and rear response, you can see the difference in the tweeters. Where the front dips, we've got a peak on the rear tweeter, and where the front tweeter peaks, we've got a dip on the rear tweeter. That looks very much like phase differences, and probably deliberate given the processing on this speaker. Isolating the tweeters front and back, we can see how they really do complement each other, but out of phase. The dip on the front, whereas it's quite level on the rear, and then we're dipping on the rear where we've got a rise on the front. And then at the high end, into the harmonics, 12.5 kilohertz, same thing again. Front starts dipping, whereas it's holding more balance on the rear tweeter. So quick look at all the drivers, what's going on. The woofer, basically rolling off from 80 hertz and playing up to around 1.2 kilohertz before it drops off. Looks like they cross over around 2 kilohertz. And the wave, of course, is the tweeter, and the passive radiator peaking around 52 hertz. Well, I mean, if nothing else, it's interesting. 360-degree speaker. It's going to sound different wherever you listen to it from. So in that sense, not a true 360. It's going to sound brighter from the front. It's going to sound a little less bright on the rear and rolled off, obviously, from the sides where you're just getting the woofers. It does appear to be out of phase, or is that, I mean, or is it actually just the DSP doing it straight off the bat like that, but looking phasey between the front and rear tweeters, which is where you're going to get your pseudo surround, your reverb, your echo, whatever they want to laughingly call it in terms of spatial sound. That's what it's doing, and it's coming from the tweeters, but very different at low volumes, as you can see, to high volumes. Massive bass adjustment for low volume, massive bass reduction at high volumes. It's going to sound different. At least you've got the ability to up and down the bass and the treble. But it's going to be an interesting listen. Described as all things I've heard on all different reviews. Warm, bright, bass lacking, terrible, great. That's what's made it interesting. You know, the price put me off, but I just wanted to get a handle on it myself. So, low volume listening, 35%, and loudness matched on the other two speakers.
I can't help myself. You know I got all these feelings and I can't check myself. Way treating you, that shit was madness. And now you're with me every day, that shit is magic. Whoa. And every time I can see you lying on Instagram, but every day I'll be showing you, girl, just who I am. Now I got a picture of the sad boy, cause he be crying over what he could've had, boy.
All three when playing the same track, and compared to the original track, well, the Middleton does have the biggest bass. It's quite an impressive bass extension. However, it's also very overblown, so you're either going to like or hate it. The big difference is, apart from that big bass difference for the Middleton and the other two speakers, is in the high end, where the Middleton is all over the place. We've got a big dip, 6 kilohertz, which isn't on the original track, and another one, 1.5 to just after 2 kilohertz. That's not on the original track. And the 9 kilohertz peak, it's relying on for some sharp clarity. So not entirely accurate, the Middleton, but sounds quite nice at low volume. So when people describe this as warm, they have got to be listening at low volumes. That's where it sounds warm. Warm, but and with a little bit of a high-end kick, but with loads of the sound missing. There are huge chunks that you can hear are just not there. Now there's going to be enough there for a lot of people. If you like a warm sound and a boosted bass, I'm known as Mr. Boomy Bass apparently, and apparently also because I'm a non-audiophile, I'm told I don't know the difference between deep bass and boosted bass. I think I do, I've been doing this for decades actually, and I think I do. I talk about mid bass, deep bass, upper bass, but hey, that's fine. You can have your opinion. I've got mine. I just thought that was a bit of a giggle because I don't agree with what someone else is saying. Then obviously I don't know what I'm talking about. By the way, purists, people who talk about a neutral sound, won't get that debate. We've done it multiple times, relative to what? Really, it's relative to the master mix. But anyway, if we give them their due and they like a neutral sound, but you're in a niche, by the way. All the research shows give people tone controls, audiophiles or not, they all push the bass. Almost all push the bass. It's a niche segment of the market that don't want to push the bass. Simple as that. But the great thing about audio is we can all discuss this and swap opinions. Let's just not attack each other for doing that. So 35% sounds very warm, but it is a massive boost to the bass. So it may even still, for boosted bass lovers, that still may be a bit too much. And because it's low volume, may make it sound a bit too muddy. Now there is enough. The high is not great, pretty poor. But because of where the peaks are, especially the 9 kilohertz peak, there's enough treble to get a semblance of what you will call clarity, along with the deep bass. And that, for a lot of people, will sound nice. It does sound nice. It certainly sounds... This is in default mode, by the way. I'm going to do custom mode at the louder volumes, then default mode at maximum volumes again. Why? Because custom mode seems to come... For me, if I'm going to do one custom mode, and assume most people don't want to get fiddly, all different volumes are going to have one custom mode, it's after 50% when a lot of these speakers, most of these speakers start limiting and reducing relative bass. Whereas default, it should sound clearer in default, because if normally you start pushing the bass, it's going to sound too muddy at low volume. So default, anyway, and it gives us a chance to hear what the speaker's really doing. We'll do custom mode, the next comparison, in this video, not another video. But it certainly beats out the Boom in terms of enjoyable listen for me. But if you don't like boosted bass, you won't like either of them, to be honest. So I do prefer it against the Boom. It's not having its finest hour, but it's still a decent listen. It's the cheapest here, but the most balanced is clearly the JBL Extremely Priced 3. No longer the JBL Extremely Priced 3 because it's cheaper than the Marshall Middleton, which is definitely extremely priced. So it's the most balanced here. I think its quirk is its 6 kilohertz peak, which is either going to work or not work for you, depending on what you listen to. But yeah, I can understand why you'd say that's a nice listen. On its own, it's a decent listen, as long as you're not a purist and you're not expecting it to be accurate. But the bass may be exactly what you want for low volumes. But at the same time, that processing don't work for me. It doesn't make it sound bigger than the speaker itself. It just makes it sound hazy. So, and the woofer's bin to the side makes it even more lacking focus. I'm doing the testing on axis. That's where it sounds the best, but it will sound different all round. Of course, it's going to sound better from the rear than the other two speakers. Bear in mind, it's a 360-degree speaker. So we go to louder volumes and we'll do them in custom mode, going +8 on the bass here, trying to push the bass, which we already know is going to reduce at louder volumes.
There's a fire in me, melting at the bottom of the sea. It was a beautiful thing.
three speakers playing the same track. The Middleton doesn't have an advantage now in the bass, or you can measure some increased bass extension around the 40 Hz mark. It's not significant, and there's a lack of bass. So we have the peak 60 to 70 Hz mark. It's in line with the Motion Boom. It's behind the JBL Xtreme 3, and it has an excessive upper bass kick, which along with its big dips, 1 to 2 kilohertz, and then the 5 to 7 kilohertz dip again, makes it a very different listen than it was at lower volumes. It's lost its warmth. You now hear these big gaps. You notice what you're missing between the Boom and the Xtreme. Yes, the Xtreme has a bit more bass, but you wouldn't really know that any bass was missing on the Motion Boom to listen in isolation. And it's got, in its custom mode, it's got a bit more of a high-end peak. Yes, that's completely inaccurate, but this speaker has no tweeters, and you're going to need it for some clarity. And now we see a complete opposite. So now they were in custom mode. I've gone to custom mode. I said I would do the louder volumes in custom mode, where I think custom mode works the best. We've got this bass 2.8, it's still bass light. It's complete switcheroony from low volumes. So it goes from warm to being a bit brittle. So you can't even say it's bright because there's so much of the sound missing. I mean, it's really off. I mean, if you can listen to it and it would be okay with some genres, but overall, and especially if you're A-Bing with other speakers, I mean, it's just, well, you can't really listen. I'm just so aware of what I'm not hearing, along with the complete disappearance of the bass. It's ridiculous having that much bass at low volume and then basically no deep bass, other than, you know, where the passive radiator is kicking in around the 53 Hertz, but then it's completely missing up to about 180 Hertz. The other two sound way better. Even the Motion Boom is now kicking the arse. That's 60 odd quid. Then this £270 speaker, the Marshall Middleton. I've kind of tweaked my EQ to sound a bit smoother now for the Motion Boom, just to round out that deep bass that I quite like. I think it sounds like deep bass on the Motion Boom. I think everything is relative, but in terms of what you can get on these types of speakers, it's got deep bass. My EQ now, slightly smoother, less fizzy. Still fizzy because of where the peaks are, but that's all you're getting, along with the hazy sound. So for me, it's clear win for the Motion Boom. And then JBL Xtreme 3, you know, it's quite accurate, but it does have its 6 kilohertz peak, which you're either gonna like or not like, or maybe just don't think about. It's gonna depend on, again, genre matching, whether you're getting many highs. If you've already got a bright track and you're playing these sort of tracks, or relatively neutral tracks, your real music, your real vocals and all that, 6 kilohertz peak will jump out at you as being a bit harsh, but it does sound more balanced. Probably the win here at these volumes, but in terms of value, I mean, this is on another planet. $229, $249 versus £66, $80. It's just, I mean, crazy good value, and you can really change the sound of it using custom EQ in the app. Whereas you've got a 3-band balancer, because then it's not an EQ on the JBL Xtreme 3. You've got 2 tone controls that hardly really make any difference at the end of the day for the Marshall Middleton. I do like Stockwell, and that Stockwell is the only Marshall speaker that I've liked of all the ones I've listened to. But the Motion Boom is a good listen. But I mean, you can hear the deficiencies. We have to push that high end simply because it's the only one here with no tweeters. You're going off of those 2 woofers. Got to, you know, it's struggling with the high end, and you're pushing that high end to overcome that. But it still sounds decent. Only in an A/B does the highs obviously sound a bit off, but there's enough there overall balance to sound still a decent overall balance listen. So they talk about this being a loud speaker. That was part of their marketing. The heaviest portable sound in your hand. Portable's heavy. I don't know really what that means. The heaviest. I mean, it's quite chunky, but it's not the heaviest ever. It's actually 1.8 kilos. 1.5 kilos the Boom, and 1.9 kilos the Xtreme 3, so in between these other two, but they talk about it going really loud. So, but already you saw 65% volume, 55%. It's not going that loud, is it? Maximum volume test.
The labyrinth will guide you far away to a place where senses will decay. Your ghosts and minds will shadow play. Upside down.
In terms of peaks, the loudest is the Motion Boom. It's the loudest in peaks because it's the strongest in the mids area. Low mids 400 to 1 kilohertz. But by a smidgen, overall, the JBL Xtreme 3 is the loudest. It's got some higher peaks at the high end. And one thing's for sure, the Middleton is not the loudest. The yellow line, I mean, it's completely lacking between the yellow line. It's completely lacking compared to the other two speakers. And even if it wasn't compared to the other two speakers, you've got glaring holes in the frequency response. You've got a complete lack of bass now. 180 hertz and below is gone completely. Not a good listen here. One thing I can safely say is the winner there was not the Marshall Middleton. I mean, it's completely lost. It doesn't push the volumes, even with a massive bass reduction. The advantage of reducing bass that much is you can push the mids and the highs a bit more, but you don't. You don't really. You just get an unlistenable sound, to be quite honest. I mean, miles behind. For the price, crazy. 180 quid, maybe okay, but $270, $300. And the only reason you're going to buy that is if you like a very bass-heavy, deep bass sound at low volumes, which, I mean, it does deliver if that's what you want it for, along with its quirks and its hazy sound. But it is a decent listen if you like that bass at low volumes. That's the only thing I can say good about this speaker, and for some people that may be enough. In terms of how loud they go, back to default mode. It's got the biggest peak because of where the mids are pushed, and overall it's only about like less than half a decibel in it. Obviously the JBL Xtreme 3 goes louder if you plug the mains lead in, but I'm all about going portable and wireless. That's what my channel's all about. So on battery, it's only just beating the Motion Boom. I mean, that's why there's no argument. I know, as much as you want to argue about, I mean, apparently I'm a non-audiophile, and so I don't really know about bass. But by the way, all of us, I think we can agree, that's unbelievable value. I know I'm talking about the Tribit Stormbox Blast as being now my pound for pound champion, simply because if I can take this, I do, if I got a choice for two, I will pick up the Stormbox Blast. I know I get a little bit more out of it in terms of the overall balance, bigger sound, blah, blah, blah. But in terms of value, and that's still two of those for one blast. I mean, you could argue it's still the pound for pound champ, but for me, it's the Blast. But it's certainly not retired, and it's certainly still up there as a proper contender. So overall, we've got a warm sound at low volumes, but the bass may still be too much for some people. It is a big bass. Of course, you can reduce it, and the possibility to go quite deep is there. Got a hollow nature to the sound. It's not very accurate at all. If you're a purist, you're not going to like that. And I do make a differentiation between purist and audiophiles. From where I come from, audiophile was something complete. It is about having high-end gear. Now it seems to be about just people who like a pure sound, a neutral sound. That's completely different. That's not an audiophile. But they listen to people who talk about themselves being an audiophile, and I mean, that's fair play to everybody, but it gives me a giggle. But anyway, whatever you want to call yourself, I would say, so if you're a purist, you're not really going to like the Marshall Middleton because it's not good. The bass will be too much. It's not accurate enough. It's not focused enough. Are you following where I'm going with this? I will say, I applaud it for sounding quite sharp in the highs, even though more highs are missing than you're actually getting due to where the peaks are. So there's enough of the peaks to fool you into thinking, oh, it's quite a clear speaker, but it really isn't. But they've just pushed it in quite cleverly. There is the mark scale. I don't know if you're aware of. You can actually, I mean, it is a thing in doing an EQ on a track where you only have to, there are certain equally spaced points of the frequency response where you only have to play around with those to alter the overall balance. You'll perceive it as completely changed. It's called the Bark scale. So we know that. I mean, that's part of psychoacoustics, and they achieve that. I will give them that. So I'll give you the specs. I always do it at the end of a video, and here we go. We talked about, they're all made in China, you know that. We talked about the prices. We've already talked about the battery. They're all pretty similar, but by the way, it's still the smallest on the Marshall Middleton. Bluetooth 5.1, which is on the Middleton, same as Xtreme 3, and it's Bluetooth 5 on the Motion Boom. Surprised me, you can do stereo, but only stereo. You can do stereo, true wireless stereo, or up to 100 in party mode, or 100 plus they call in party mode. As far as I can see, they've got stack mode, is what Marshall call their pairing mode. And it says nothing about TWS. I've only got one, I can't test it. Appears to me you can't even do TW for the money. And the fact that they've bothered to have some sort of pairing in the app. And actually you don't even need the app, you can do the pairing off the speaker itself. But you can't pair them in stereo. If you've got two, it'll still be party mode, they'll still be playing the exact same thing. All got USB connections, and it's a two-way. It's a two-way, that sounds good, Al. Yep, it's a two-way. It means not only can you charge in on the USB-C, you can charge out, you can use it as a power bank, and it's got the auxiliary, by the way, on the Marshall Middleton. All got auxiliary input, as I just said, except for, we'll talk about value. Oh, it was, for a lot of people, that was the deal breaker, no auxiliary input on the Motion Boom. Talk about being used as a power bank, can all be used as a power bank. Surprisingly, the cheapest on the table here, the Motion Boom, is the only one you can make phone calls with. And Mum, I'll be home soon. What's that all about? Said about ignore the power ratings. We've already seen how loud they go, but that's normally why you want to know the watt ratings. That's not. It doesn't. They don't give you how they measure these things, and even what they're measuring anymore. I've given up on that. But if you want to know, they say 30 watts. I think 50 watts AC, but they also getting a bit creative in how they specify it. I believe I went with what I think was correct, 50 watts, and then 40 watts. I think that will be on battery, 50 or 60 watts, depending on what you believe in their own specs. I will say the USB-C charging can do up to 60 watts. So it supports fast charging, whereas the Motion Boom will only do 10 watts of charging. But you can also, with their charger, do 60 watts of charging with their charger that comes with it. The JBL Xtreme Price 3. Stop saying it out, I know. The extremely priced Marshall Middleton. Talked about the weights. I said it don't float, but the Motion Boom and the JBL Xtreme both float and are IP7, and it's IP67.6 being dustproof for the JBL Xtreme 3. We've got two 65mm woofers, two 20mm tweeters, two passive radiators. On the Middleton, we've got two 75mm woofers, two 15mm tweeters, two passive radiators front and back. On the Boom, we've just got the two 65mm woofers. So got tweeters, no tweeters. But the Motion Boom. Dum diddle 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 dum diddle. It's got titanium drivers in terms of those auxiliary inputs. So it's 16 milliseconds, not quite zero. So not much latency, but still some latency on auxiliary. 33 milliseconds, which is, if it was Bluetooth, it would be good, but it's not. That's on auxiliary. But in Bluetooth mode, best I've ever tested, 33 milliseconds in Bluetooth latency, which is the same as the auxiliary on the Xtreme 3, and that's 100 milliseconds latency in Bluetooth mode, and it's 160. So both of those for Bluetooth latency are unusable for me, and that's pretty bloody brilliant. And if that's what you want it for, streaming movies over Bluetooth, job done. As I said, all got EQ in theory in the app. Go into the app for that one, and it's disappeared. But it was there when I first opened the app. But you can do EQ off the speaker itself. You will need the app for JBL to do their EQ, and the same for Soundcore Motion Boom. But way, way, way better than the other two speakers. It's a multi-band slider. Makes a real difference, whereas these two will juggle quite a bit. Obviously, they all do some balancing at different volumes, but these two, the Xtreme 3 especially, once you get over a certain threshold, it's all about balancing rather than actually pushing what you think you're pushing. That's a roundup. What's the verdict? As if you couldn't guess. For me, it's a non-starter for several usability issues and audio issues, to be quite honest. But at low volumes, it's a great listen. If, like me, you like bass boosted and don't know the difference between deep bass and boosted bass, it is a boosted bass, but it's deep, where I find it more forgiving and giving it that warm sound. However, it's still very inaccurate, and that may actually break what you would have liked in a warm speaker. Certainly inferior to the JBL Xtreme 3, and certainly the best value here by a million miles is the Soundcore Motion Boom, given that you can have like 4 of them for the other couple of speakers, these three of those for that. But 2 of those is all you need or going to get, because you can't link more than that. So 2 of those, 120 is still cheaper than these other 2 speakers. Crazy, crazy value there. But the design is not what everybody likes. That's been my Marshall Middleton review. It's my opinion. I'm not saying it's right. I was quite proud to read that apparently I don't understand bass because I'm not an audiophile. And I'm not an audiophile, but I know what audiophile means. And I'm not a purist. Most people are not purists, by the way. By the way, you purists are niche. And that's great. I like that you watch my channel. We're all about audio, all about opinions. We can have a giggle together, trying to debate who's right and who's wrong. You know, everyone's opinion, they're right. Just don't attack each other for having that opinion, but let's enjoy the debate, is what I'm saying. I feel a lot better that I've actually come out now. I've come out of the closet on international YouTube. I'm telling the world, I now identify as a complete twat. I know a lot of you already realise that, but it's a relief. Going to go and tell my mum now. I never, in all these years, revealed to her that. She thinks I'm a really nice guy. But it feels good. Guys, I hope to see you in another video. And I thank you for watching this one.
It comes from China.
My speaker's got deep bass, balanced mids, and a bright high.
Yes, mine sounds exactly the same.